brief background of my firm, Quantum Advisors. So we are essentially an India-based asset manager. I mean, most of our clients tend to be these university endowment funds, pension funds, and sovereign wealth funds. So when they look to allocate money to India, we kind of manage money for them. So ever since we began our research process, I mean, we had a lot of emphasis on the governance factor. We always wanted to kind of partner with companies who treated their minority shareholders very well. So that was our primary emphasis in our research. But in 2014 is when I actually joined Quantum. And in 2015, because of a lot of trends towards ESG, a few of our clients kind of asking us to look at all these things more closely, at Quantum, my team and I kind of developed a rating methodology to rate Indian companies on their ESG performance. So we've covered a fair bit of companies in our coverage universe. And of course, the topic that which I'm going to talk about today is regarding the environmental impact, which is likely to be there where in terms of India's growth over the next decade. So what I've done is I've just prepared a short deck kind of highlighting what is India's contribution to the overall global warming and what is the likely path forward. So since India began as an economy, India began its reforms in 1990. And if you look at a very long-term time frame, India's GDP has grown at about 6.5%. And as is often the case, no matter which country it is, a lot of this development is invariably accompanied by increasing carbon emissions. So the chart which you see on the left, we started at just over 1.1 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions in 1990. Today, we are close to 3.6 billion. So in absolute terms, we've increased by about 3x. But despite that, when you compare India's contribution in terms of per capita emissions, it is still nowhere near the world average. So while the world average is at about 7.3 tons, and so what I've given you is a chart which shows the top three emitters, US, China, and India. So we are still far behind China and far behind US as well. So now the key question that is there before all of us is, how can India lead the effort to transition to a net zero emission world? I mean, will India end up being a potential climate leader, or will it end up being a laggard? So just to explain this particular slide to you, I mean, very simply, we have assumed that if each and every country in the world maintains its emissions at current levels in 2018, and it is only India whose emissions change so that it becomes equal to either the world average, to China's per capita level, or USA's level. So the circle which you see just above the blue block, or which says 7.3, what it means is that if India's emissions reach close to the levels of where the world's per capita emissions are, India itself will contribute 11.3% to total emissions, which currently are at 55 billion tons. In the extreme scenario, if India reaches a level of 18.2 tons per capita, then India itself is going to contribute nearly 38%. So it becomes essential that whatever growth is pursued by India, we need to ensure that the environmental impact is kept to a minimum. So if you are an Indian policy maker, I mean, if you have to wear the hat of an Indian policy maker, I mean, the typical steps that you would usually take to reduce emissions would see which are the sectors which are the major contributors to overall emissions. So when it comes to India's case, it's predominantly the energy sector, which is about 68%. Now, energy includes other subcomponents as well, such as transportation and electricity. Then agri is also another important contributor. Doesn't get too much attention, but in terms of the type of fertilizers which are being used, the kind of farming practices which India adopts, all of this will have a major role in developing a sustainable food production system. Now, India's challenge with respect to agriculture also is that India has only 2% of the landmass of the world, but it has to feed nearly 17% of the world's population. So the key question is, what are some of the challenges which India is likely to face? So this is just another deck which kind of shows you the contribution of the energy sector's emissions. So typically it's electricity because a majority of it is still fired by coal-fired plants. Then of course you have transportation and you have manufacturing and construction. So as a developing economy, India will tend to produce a lot more of cement, a lot more of steel, a lot more of consumer appliances. All these things are ultimately going to add to emissions. So what are the key challenges then a country like India faces? Now, typically, when you look at most developed countries which have reached a stable growth path, the focus is on increasing renewable capacity and switching to cleaner sources of fuel. So while ambitious plans have been announced by the Indian government also, at times we do find the implementation lacking. So when it comes to the renewable capacity addition, I mean, they had made this announcement 2 or 3 years back that they want to be at about 175 gigawatts of renewables by the year 2023. So, I mean, if you look at the last 5 years, while there has been some sort of progress, the required rate is still multiples of the installations that was ever achieved in the past. Similarly, when it comes to our primary energy mix, we are still highly dependent on fossil fuels. So coal, oil, and natural gas still tend to dominate the energy landscape. Even traditional biomass, which is, sometimes people are so poor that they end up chopping wood from the trees just to ensure that they get enough heat. Secondly, there is also a lot of emphasis on trying to green the transportation sector. So this is according to a research by Bloomberg New Energy Finance, which says that India is likely to be a laggard when it comes to increasing the adoption of electric vehicles. So while according to Bloomberg, I mean, they believe that only 33% of passenger vehicles sold in India will be EV based. I mean, our internal view is that it's going to be a lot less because most Indian consumers cannot afford these expensive cars. And lastly, there has also been research conducted by the International Energy Agency on the potential savings that can be achieved in terms of improving efficiency in the industrial sector. So let's say if you make steel manufacturing more efficient, if you make cement manufacturing more efficient, what are the potential savings that are likely to be achieved? So the only problem is that even if industry becomes efficient, because we are starting at such a low base and because India's infrastructure is not yet built up, chances are that emissions on an absolute basis may still end up increasing. So this was a brief backdrop of the scale of the challenge that is facing a country like India. So what we are looking for from students like you are solutions to tackle some of the problems that we've highlighted. They need to be innovative. They need to be India specific. You need to ensure that a large section of the population in India may not be able to adopt some of the technologies or some of the methodologies which have succeeded in developed markets. So the solution which we are looking for is something that is India specific, something which is innovative, something which is scalable, and which tends to benefit the majority of Indians. And of course, if you want to get additional information, let's say if you're not very familiar with a lot of details regarding India's power generation mix or so, so these are just some of the links that I've given you. I believe Jeff will also kind of put these things on the site itself, so it shouldn't be a problem for you to access it. So that was about it from my side. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them. Yeah, so the detailed breakup is available on the next slide. So it includes electricity, which occupies 49% share. It includes manufacturing and construction activities. It includes transportation, so the use of diesel and petrol, either in commercial vehicles or in cars. And it includes other fuels in various industries. So electricity is the major contributor to energy. And after that, it is manufacturing and construction.
Okay, thank you very much.
We have extended the deadline to the 29th because there's more.
29th.
Yeah, there are more teams who are interested. And so in order to allow for more teams to get involved, we've extended it to the 29th.
So what they've installed is about 5.7 gigawatts in 2015. We reached a peak of 14.2, and then it's tapered down to 6.8. So to meet that initial target that they had set, they will now need to adopt a rate of 36 gigawatts a year, which is it's unlikely that they're going to achieve it.
Unless you have the most amazing investment strategy ever.
Yeah. Just to add here some perspectives on typical conversations that you would have to solutions regarding climate change. It tends to start with a solar as a solution, wind as a solution, or electric vehicle as a solution. But India's challenges are far bigger. Carl alluded to it in the morning session, and I also kind of mentioned it in a different example. If you take some of the developing markets like Germany, for instance, which have increasingly adopted, solar and wind energy or renewable energy, the cost of electricity has actually gone up, therefore burdening people with higher prices. In India, if you take the total 1.2 billion population, there are about 200, 300 million people who may not be able to afford those high cost electricity. So one solution is to keep the electricity cost lower, but the government takes the subsidy, but that is not sustainable. So what we also want the participants to think about is keep these domestic challenges that India has, the demographics of India, the income levels of India, and not bring a developed market solutions to India and expect outcomes. So in the judging criteria, along with the fact that it has to be innovative, scalable, the assessment will also be based on what is the GHG reduction and the timeline for it. So it also becomes, there's an element of reality that we want to achieve in the given time frame. So obviously there could be solutions which can have significant impact, let's say for argument's sake 2080, but we don't want that. We want something that is aligned to countries' own sustainable development goals. So those are some of those pointers that would be helpful in coming up with a different solution. The solution could be also, say, take for example, Carl mentioned about appliances. India's share of penetration of air conditions, like you have heating solutions in the US, India is a hotter country than US, we have air conditions. The penetration rate is just 4%. As income level goes up, let's say the climate keeps getting hotter, the penetration rate is only going to go up. If that were to go up to 25% in another 15 years, the use of electricity, air conditions and refrigerants that are used, which tends to have ozone depleting nature and stuff like that, could have significant ramifications on a GHG over a period of time. So what I wanted to say here is that look beyond the obvious solutions of just a thermal power or a wind power or electric vehicle as a solution to India's problem. It could be that, but in a very different form, shape, or manner. It could be a finance-led solution. It could be a agriculture-based solution. Like Carl mentioned, 16% of our share is agriculture. And biggest part of the agriculture is cattle feeding. India has the highest number of cows in the world. That tends to have its own implications. So just wanted to give those insights into while you're thinking about solutions.
Yeah, so I mean, it depends on which sector you're looking at. So one of the reasons why, this renewable capacity addition also slowed down was because there was one state in the south which actually had signed a power purchase agreement at a time when electricity prices were high. Then as the cost of solar panels fell down and new bids came at much lower prices, what happened is that the state government did not want to honor existing contracts. So that is one of the reasons which kind of dampened a bit of sentiment when it came to the solar capacity addition or the renewable energy generation. So there are certain subjects which are what you could say part of the concurrent list, where states have a major role rather than the central government. But there are other aspects where the central government does end up taking major decisions. So most of the heavy industries in India, they had to come under the purview of what is known as a perform, achieve, and trade scheme. Now, this was something which was decided by the center. What they did was they identified 8 major energy intensive industries. You have the likes of cement, steel, aluminum, chemicals, textiles, and a few others. And they were given specific targets when it came to energy efficiency. So those which achieved a target were given certain credits which they could then trade. So it was a form of an energy saving certificate or something like a carbon credit, which these companies can then trade for with those who may not have achieved the target. So it largely depends on a sector to sector basis. Power is something where the state governments have a lot of say in it, because you have the major purchasers of power are all these state electricity distribution boards. And typically power is a politically very sensitive subject, because a lot of times free power is an election strategy. Providing free power to people or free power to farmers tends to be an election strategy. And what happens is that a lot of the distribution companies in India are actually selling power at a price which is less than their own cost of procurement. Now, while the center has tried to introduce various schemes, tried to reduce the transmission and distribution losses in the power sector, it's been a mixed bag. There are certain states which have improved the performance, but other states have not necessarily improved the performance. Now, when it comes to things like transportation, maybe Nataraj, you can add over here whether certain states have, come out with subsidies on electric vehicles, or whether that's still part of the central government mandate also. But there was a scheme introduced known as the FAME scheme, which is this faster adoption of electric vehicles. But again, it didn't really take off to the extent that it was expected.
Yeah, just to add on to the earlier question of whether our sector is central or regional, it's a combination of both. There is one large listed company called Power Grid of India, which has grids all over India. But there are state electricity boards who also have their own grids. Do they work together? Yes, they do work together while planning the grid facility, but the rate at which the power is bought and sold, it's both a local subject as well as a central subject. So just to put that in perspective. On the broader energy transportation part, again, there is a state I want to kind of localize it to the extent that you can understand. So let's say if you had North Carolina, they will have certain duty on gasoline. The center will have certain duty on gasoline. So there are state taxes and central taxes. If you take one gallon of gas, 50% is approximately duties, charged by both center and state. So it is also a state subject and a central subject. So just wanted to give that color. But electrification in India, electric vehicle progress in India is likely to be very, very slow, because one, it's expensive. If you just to give a perspective, we sell about 4 million passenger vehicles in the country. Out of 4 million vehicles, approximately 2 million vehicles have a cost which is about $10,000. Or maybe $7,500. Let me put it $7,500, and that's the biggest selling car in India. So I just wanted to keep in mind, because why electrification will unlikely to get adopted, because it will be very expensive for people who can't afford. Again, I'll start with saying that we posted about 6 videos, which gives perspective on the climate change in India. One of the videos is, a talk person called Bittu Segal, and he talks about environment, how people who are living, around forest areas in India have kind of what is called have lived in harmony with those habitats that they have. So so if you take that as a cultural background, India is very strong in that. There are regions where people love their own, have lived in harmony with their own habitat, but it also comes with challenges of development. So incrementally over the last 10, 20 years, our forest cover, is getting shorter and shorter because people are putting roads and building, railways through it. So there is a lot of awareness with respect to nature and living in harmony and across India, but it also depends on income levels. For instance, I work very closely with certain nature conservation efforts in India. At the end of the day, poor people, there is poaching. So it depends on income levels and opportunities available, urbanization versus rural job availability, and so on. But broadly speaking, India has had a reasonable self-consciousness with respect to its own environment. But as a policy, it's a different question altogether. At the government central planning level, I don't think they are very serious about protecting our environment or green cover. So I would recommend watching that Bittu Segal's Bittu Sehgal. It's on the website of the India Impact Challenge, and it gives you perspective on how last 30 years of trying to save nature in India has progressed and its challenges. No, this is a solution. This is a competition to find solutions to India's climate change, right? The challenges could be as big as from power sector, right down to how we take care of our habitats and green cover. If your question is whether companies being ESG compliant is a way we would assess the submissions, the answer is perhaps no. But if the answer could be, what is the solution that you want to bring to the table? How effective will that solution be to those climate change problem, as opposed to just ESG?
Okay. So, Sarthak, just to give an example, let's say if your focus is on reducing emissions from the transportation sector, what would be the best way? I mean, India, most of the personal mobility is dominated by two-wheelers. As Nataraj had even mentioned previously, that there are only 4 million passenger vehicles sold. Now, the question is, do you promote the use of more two-wheelers? Do you kind of give incentives to promote the use of shared mobility? Or is it about developing public transportation infrastructure, which India kind of lags in? So which maybe you could look at things like on a cost per kilometer basis or on an emission per kilometer basis, which is the most practical solution. Similarly, you can use these insights in the power sector as well, which is another large contributor to emissions. Is it possible for India to completely phase out coal plants? Or do you try to implement certain technological solutions, such as carbon capture, to kind of reduce the emissions from these coal plants? Every solution will have a certain cost and benefit analysis, and this is what we are trying to ensure that you guys bring it out in your report.
All right, can everybody see the website here? I'll go over. Oops. We'll start at the beginning so I can take people through. So when you come to the website, you can just start by clicking on either student registration or about the competition or any of those. And then once you get in, there's a menu up here. So there's some summary about the competition here. Student registration page has the application linked. What's required in your submission. There are no participation fees anymore because of the generosity of our sponsor, Quantum Advisors. They have decided to cover the fees for student teams who decide to participate. So with the sponsorship, so that you are all set there. When you do apply, go in, and this is what it looks like, and you click here to apply, start your application. The other reason to make sure that you start your application is that there will be sessions toward the end of next week where you can ask questions and do a Q&A with the experts that are in the videos that Nataraj and Carl were talking about. And then to get to those videos, if you go to resources, in resources, we have some general questions that we answer, like what types of investment you can include, what's required in your submission. So what's absolutely required are these 2 items, and then you have optional items that you can submit to, but you do not have to. You do not have to address one specific industry, but you can if you want. And then there's the criteria for judging. And within this criteria, and we're going to add some language around the social aspects as well, based on some great questions this morning. But it's about innovation. Has it been done before? And if it has been done, how is it going to be better with your strategy, with your proposal? Scale, is it local, regional, or national? And also what type of investment is it? So if you are looking at a combination at development finance, or a combination of development finance with other private sources of capital, a type of blended finance strategy, you'll need to make sure that it's feasible. How would it actually occur? Is it allowed? And then if you're looking at, you can also look at venture capital solutions, so more specific investments, but then you have to show how that's scalable and the kind of impact it would have when it is scalable. Because then the next criterion is climate change impact. So is it going to reduce or sequester or avoid greenhouse gas emissions? And then provide your supporting evidence to that. You'll have to, of course, look at not only whether the investment is feasible, but also what kinds of risks are associated with it and how are those risks dealt with. And then the sources of funding, is there an appetite for those investments? Are they feasible? And here's where we also talked about some of those social aspects in the morning, which is there are certain types of finance, whether it's impact investing or development finance, that require a certain level of awareness of social equity issues that need to be incorporated. So when you're talking about access to capital, you also have to address those types of issues. And then finally, time. How long is it going to take? How quickly will the climate benefits materialize? What's the return rate of the investments? How is that return rate impacted if it's blended finance? Who sees their return rate first and when? That kind of thing. So you might have, in blended finance, you might have some sources of capital that just want the money back, not actually a return above that. And then you'll, of course, when the private capital comes in, they'll want a different type of return rate. So just addressing those kinds of things. If you scroll down further, we have different information sources. So here you'll find Quantum Advisors insights, and then the interviews that they were talking about. These are all the links to the interviews that were made with experts ranging from climate change and air pollution, water resources, this climate change and social impact, climate change and ecology and environmental risk with Batu Sagal, which is who they were referring to earlier. And then, of course, the Triple P and this responsible investing in India, which is another video with Arvind Chari, who is the Chief Investment Officer at Quantum Advisors. And then there's other links in here that you can use for different subject matter, which we'll be adding to as well. And this is where we're going to add those resources that were on the end of the presentation that Carl gave earlier. So I just want to make sure that we showed that so you know where things are. And the resources page is linked on the other pages as well, so that you can always get to it for your information. Okay.